caught her arrow midair, an Apache law that changed everything. The sun was beginning to set over the small Apache village, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. The air was still heavy with tension as villagers gathered near the center of the community. This was not a celebration or a festival day. It was a day of reckoning. Something had happened that disturbed the balance of the village. Something serious enough to draw everyone out. The chatter of voices was low and cautious, each person aware that today justice would need to be served in the way their ancestors had always taught. At the edge of the gathering, a young woman stood quietly, her bow in hand. Beth. She was strong, determined, and well respected among those who knew her, though not all in the village fully understood her strength. She had always been different, not in a way that made her strange, but in a way that made her capable of things few others dared to attempt. Her eyes, dark and sharp, scanned the crowd. The faces reflected curiosity, fear, and respect all at once. Breath. Everyone knew that she was about to act, and what she was about to do could change how they all saw her forever. Earlier that day, a disagreement had erupted between her family and another in the village. The issue seemed small at first, a misunderstanding over land boundaries. But tensions had been building for months, and what started as a small argument had grown into a dangerous conflict. Both sides felt wronged and believed they had the right to demand justice. The elders had tried to calm the situation, but the young woman could not stand idly by. She had been wronged too, though not in the same way as her family. Her pride, her honor, and her sense of fairness had been challenged, and she could not let it go. The villagers knew the young woman was skilled with the bow. Many had seen her shoot targets with a precision that was almost unbelievable. They also knew she had a temper when provoked, though it was tempered by a deep respect for tradition and the wisdom of the elders. Today she stood ready, her hands steady on the bow, her feet planted firmly on the earth. The bowstring hummed softly as she pulled an arrow, the tip glinting in the fading sunlight. It was not an act of rage alone. It was a call for justice, a challenge to the wrong that had been done, and a test of her own courage. From across the gathering, an elder watched carefully. He was a man of quiet strength, known for his wisdom and fairness. His hair, streaked with gray, framed a face marked by years of experience. He had seen conflicts come and go in the village, and he had learned that the strongest actions were not always the loudest or the most violent. He understood the power of tradition, and he knew that this young woman, though bold, needed guidance if her actions were to lead to understanding rather than chaos. The crowd grew still as the woman raised the bow. Time seemed to slow. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying the tension across the village. Some villagers held their breath, anticipating what might happen. The arrow represented more than just a physical challenge. It was symbolic of justice, courage, and the laws that had guided their people for generations. Then, in a moment that seemed almost impossible, a man stepped forward from the crowd. He was strong and confident, with eyes that mirrored both wisdom and calm. Without a word, he moved in front of her, and before anyone could blink, he caught the arrow midair. The action was so precise, so fast, that it seemed magical. The villagers gasped. The sound of the arrow being stopped echoed in the quiet, as though the world itself had paused to witness what was happening. The young woman froze, her hand still on the bow. Shock, surprise, and a hint of anger flashed across her face. But she had expected resistance, but she had not expected this. To be stopped so effortlessly was both humbling and confusing. The man held the arrow in his hand, examining it as if it were something delicate yet powerful. His expression was calm, unreadable, but there was a message in his eyes. He had not come to punish, but to teach. The elder stepped closer, his voice soft but firm, carrying across the quiet crowd. In a way, strength is not only about force. Buh.
It is about wisdom, patience, and respect. What you do with your power defines who you are.
Breath. His words were simple, but their weight was heavy. They hung in the air, pressing on everyone who heard them. The young woman lowered her bow slightly, her mind racing. She felt a mixture of frustration and admiration. She had been stopped, yes, but not in a way that shamed her. Instead, she had been shown that there was a deeper meaning to her actions than she had understood. The man who had caught the arrow spoke next, his voice steady. You have skill, no doubt about it. But skill without control is like fire without direction. It can destroy, but it does not build. Bear. The young woman's hands trembled slightly as she considered his words. She had come to demand justice, to show that she would not be ignored. But now she saw that the act of showing strength was not the same as exercising wisdom. The arrow, once a tool of confrontation, had become a lesson. The villagers watched in silence, some nodding slowly, others exchanging glances of disbelief. They had never seen such an act. It was rare, almost unheard of for someone to stop another so directly without causing harm. It was not just the catching of the arrow that amazed them, but the meaning behind it. The laws of their people had always emphasized courage, fairness, and respect for life. This act embodied all of those principles. The young woman's thoughts turned inward. She realized that her anger, though justified, had blinded her to the larger picture. Justice, she understood now, was not only about proving who was right or wrong. It was about protecting the balance of the community, about acting with honor even when it was difficult. The man's intervention had changed everything, not by taking away her power, but by showing her how to use it wisely. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the village, the elder spoke again. This is the way of our people. To act with courage, but also with wisdom. To defend what is right, but not to destroy. But to honor the law that has guided us for generations. His words resonated with everyone present. The young woman lowered her bow completely, feeling a mixture of relief and newfound understanding. She had come ready for conflict, but she left with knowledge, guidance, and respect for the deeper laws that governed her people. The man returned the arrow to her, holding it with care. You have strength, and that is good. But remember, true power comes when you know when to act and when to wait. Today you have learned something more important than hitting your target. She accepted the arrow, her hands steady now, but her heart still racing. She realized that this lesson would stay with her forever. It was not just a test of skill. It was a test of character, courage, and the ability to understand the balance between action and restraint. The villagers began to murmur softly, a sense of awe and admiration spreading through the crowd. They had witnessed something extraordinary, a moment that would be remembered for years to come. The young woman had faced a challenge, and though she had not acted as she originally intended, she had grown stronger in ways she had not anticipated. The man who caught her arrow had not only stopped a potential conflict, but had also opened a door to understanding, guiding her toward the path of true respect and honor. As the gathering dispersed, the young woman walked slowly through the village, reflecting on the day's events. She understood now that the laws of her people were not restrictions. They were guides. They did not limit her power. They refined it, shaped it, and gave it purpose. She felt a sense of pride, not just in her skill, but in the lesson she had learned. The arrow that had flown through the air and been caught so effortlessly had changed everything. It had taught her that strength alone was not enough, and that the greatest victories were often those won through wisdom and understanding. That evening, as the village settled into the quiet of night, she sat by the fire with her family. The flames danced in her eyes, reflecting the lessons she had learned. She spoke little, but her thoughts were full. She thought of the man who had stopped her, of the elder who had spoken of courage and wisdom, and of the community that had watched silently but learned alongside her. She realized that she was part of something larger, a tradition that valued not only what one could do with one's hands, but also what one could do with one's heart and mind. The night passed with a calm that had been absent earlier in the day. Stars dotted the sky, and the wind whispered through the trees, carrying the memory of what had happened. The young woman slept with a sense of peace she had not felt before, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges, but that she now had the knowledge and understanding to face them. The lesson of the arrow and the law that guided its meaning would stay with her forever. By the time the sun rose again, the village had returned to its normal rhythm. Children played, elders worked, and life continued, as it always had. Yet, beneath the surface, something had shifted. The young woman had changed, and through her the village had learned once again the power of courage, skill, and wisdom united. What had begun as a moment of potential conflict had become a moment of transformation, a story that would be told for generations. And so, the day ended, not with violence, but with understanding, not with anger, but with respect. The arrow had flown, and in being caught it had struck something far more important, the heart of justice, honor, and the true meaning of the law that had guided the Apache people for centuries. The morning after the gathering, the young woman woke with a mixture of excitement and curiosity. The events of the previous evening had left her mind racing, her heart still pounding from the encounter with the man who had caught her arrow. She could not stop thinking about what he had done and what it had meant. She had aimed to demand justice, to show her skill and courage, but instead she had been stopped in a way that felt almost magical. And yet, rather than feeling humiliated, she felt a strange sense of respect for the man and for the wisdom that guided him. She rose early, just as the sun began to peek over the horizon, painting the desert landscape in gentle shades of pink and gold. The village was quiet, the stillness only broken by the soft sounds of birds waking to a new day. She walked slowly through the familiar paths of her home, reflecting on the words of the elder and the actions of the man who had intervened. Their lessons were clear. Strength without control was dangerous, and true power required wisdom, courage, and restraint. As she walked, she thought about her own actions. She realized that her anger had been justified, but it had almost blinded her to the larger meaning of justice. She had been ready to act without fully understanding the consequences. The arrow she had released in anger had flown straight and true, a perfect demonstration of her skill, yet it had been stopped not by force, but by someone who understood the balance between action and restraint. It was a lesson she would never forget. The young woman returned to the village square where the man was waiting. He had chosen not to speak much during the gathering, but now he stood quietly, observing her approach. His calm presence was reassuring, and she felt a mixture of nervousness and curiosity as she drew closer. She had questions, many questions, and she was eager to understand more about what had happened and why. The man smiled gently as she reached him. "You did not understand yesterday what you thought you understood," he said, bit. "Your arrow was a symbol, but you aimed without seeing the meaning behind it. Apache law is not just about strength or skill. It is about balance, wisdom, and the courage to act with understanding." The young woman listened carefully, her eyes wide with attention. "I wanted to demand justice," she admitted, her voice steady despite her nervousness. "I thought that showing my strength would make people see that I was right. But I see now that it was more than that. I was missing something." The man nodded. "You were missing the lesson of the law. It is not enough to act in anger or to seek revenge. True justice comes from knowing when to act and when to hold back. It comes from understanding the consequences of your actions. and from respecting the community and its traditions.
The young woman thought about this carefully.
She remembered the looks on the faces of the villagers, the tension in the air, and the silent prayers of those who hoped for a peaceful resolution. She realized that her actions could have caused harm if the man had not intervened. The lesson was clear. Her skill was important, but her judgment was equally important.
She had power, yes, but she needed wisdom to guide it. The man continued.
Bess, our ancestors taught us that courage is not just about facing danger with strength. It is about knowing what is right and having the patience to act at the right moment. Your arrow was a test, not of your skill, but of your understanding. You have potential, but potential without guidance can be dangerous. The young woman felt a sense of respect growing within her. She had always known that she was skilled with the bow, but she had never fully understood the responsibility that came with that skill. Now she saw that her actions were part of a larger tradition, one that valued not just physical strength, but wisdom, patience, and honor. She realized that she had been given a second chance, an opportunity to learn and to grow. Over the next few days, the man began to teach her more about the laws and traditions of their people. He explained how disputes were settled not with violence but with fairness, courage, and understanding. He told her stories of past leaders and elders, of how they had used wisdom to guide the community through difficult times. Each story was a lesson, showing her that strength alone was not enough, and that true honor came from acting with thought, restraint, and respect. The young woman listened intently, absorbing each lesson. She began to understand that Apache law was not rigid or harsh, but thoughtful and wise. It was designed to protect the community, to ensure that conflicts were resolved without unnecessary harm. She realized that her own desire for revenge had been natural, but that it needed to be guided by the principles of the law. She felt a deep sense of gratitude for the man who had stopped her arrow, and for the elders who had shared their wisdom. As she trained under his guidance, she began to see the connection between skill and understanding. Each practice session was not just about hitting targets, but about learning patience, precision, and control. She learned to breathe calmly, to focus her mind, and to act with purpose. The bow became more than a weapon. It became a tool for understanding herself and the world around her. With each arrow she released, she felt a growing sense of confidence, not just in her skill, but in her judgment. The villagers noticed the change in her as well. They saw that she was no longer driven solely by anger or pride, but by a desire to act with honor and wisdom. They began to respect her not just for her strength, but for her character. Her actions inspired others, showing them that courage was not just about confrontation, but about understanding, patience, and fairness. The young woman felt a deep sense of belonging, knowing that she was part of a tradition that valued not just what she could do with her hands, but what she could do with her heart and mind. One day the man gave her a new challenge. He asked her to demonstrate her skill in a controlled test, one that would show not only her ability with the bow, but her understanding of the law and her respect for the community. The young woman accepted the challenge eagerly, feeling both nervous and excited. She knew that this was an opportunity to prove herself, not just to the man or to the villagers, but to herself. The test was simple in concept, but difficult in execution. She was asked to hit a series of targets, each representing a different aspect of justice and responsibility. Some targets were close, some far. Some required careful calculation and timing. Each shot was a lesson, reminding her that precision alone was not enough, and that true skill required thought, patience, and respect for the rules. As she prepared to take her first shot, the man spoke quietly. Remember, the arrow is more than a weapon. It is a symbol of your intentions. Aim with thought, release with wisdom, and act with honor. That is the law of our people. The young woman nodded, taking a deep breath. She drew the bowstring slowly, feeling the tension and power in her hands. But she focused her mind, aiming not just with her eyes but with her heart. Then, with careful precision, she released the arrow. It flew straight and true, hitting the target perfectly. A sense of satisfaction and pride filled her chest, but she did not stop there. Buck, buck, buck. She continued with each shot, remembering the lessons she had learned about patience, timing, and understanding. Some shots were more difficult than others, requiring adjustments and careful thought. Each success was a confirmation that she was learning, growing, and becoming more than she had been the day before. The villagers gathered to watch her practice, and their admiration grew with each arrow. They saw not just a skilled archer, but a young woman who had learned to balance strength with wisdom, courage with restraint. They whispered among themselves, sharing stories of how they had never seen such growth in one so young. The man who had caught her arrow smiled quietly, knowing that she was beginning to understand the deeper meaning of the law. By the end of the day, the young woman had completed the test. She was tired, her arms sore from drawing the bow repeatedly, but her spirit was strong. She had learned that skill was only part of the equation, and that true power came from understanding, judgment, and respect for others. The man nodded approvingly, and the villagers applauded softly, showing their respect for her growth and courage. That evening, as the sun set once more, the young woman reflected on the lessons she had learned. She realized that the events of the past days had changed her in ways she had never expected. She had come seeking justice, but she had found wisdom. She had aimed an arrow in anger, but she had learned to aim her actions with thought. She had faced the challenge of the law, and she had emerged stronger, wiser, and more respected than before. The man who had caught her arrow spoke one final time that day. You have done well. Remember, skill alone does not make you strong. Wisdom, courage, and understanding will guide you further than any arrow ever could. Hold these lessons in your heart, and you will honor not only yourself, but our people and our traditions. The young woman listened, feeling a deep sense of gratitude and respect. But she knew that she had been given a rare gift, one that would stay with her for the rest of her life. The law of her people, the guidance of the elders, and the lessons of the man who had caught her arrow had changed everything. She was no longer the same person who would raise the bow in anger. She was stronger, wiser, and ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, armed not just with skill, but with understanding. As night fell, the village was calm, the stars twinkling in the clear desert sky. The young woman sat quietly by the fire, thinking of the journey ahead. She knew that there would be more challenges, more tests, and more opportunities to demonstrate her courage and wisdom. But she also knew that she was ready. She had learned the meaning of true strength, the value of patience, and the power of understanding. The lessons of the arrow would guide her always, shaping her into a leader who could honor the traditions of her people while forging her own path. And so, the second part of her journey ended, not with triumph or defeat, but with understanding and growth. She had learned that Apache law was not merely a set of rules, but a way of life, a path that guided courage, honor, and wisdom. She had begun to see her place within it, and she was ready to step forward, prepared for whatever the future might bring. The sun rose slowly over the desert horizon, casting warm golden light across the Apache village. The young woman woke with a sense of determination. Today was not just another day of learning or practice. It was the day she would face a real test. The man who had caught her arrow had explained that this challenge would measure not only her skill with the bow, but also her understanding of the law, her courage, and her ability to act wisely. Her heart raced with a mixture of excitement and nervousness, but she felt ready. She walked through the village paths, the soft wind brushing her face. The elders were already gathering in the center, their presence commanding respect. Villagers whispered quietly among themselves, some looking on with curiosity, others with admiration. Everyone knew that this test was important, and everyone was eager to see how she would perform. The young woman carried her bow with care, each step deliberate and confident. She felt the weight of expectation, but also a growing sense of calm. She remembered the lessons of the previous days: patience, understanding, and balance. The man who had caught her arrow stood at the center of the village square, waiting. His calm eyes met hers, and she nodded silently, acknowledging both his presence and the guidance he had given her. "Remember," he said softly, "today is not just about hitting targets, but it is about showing your understanding, your patience, and your respect for our traditions."
Let your mind guide your hands, and your heart guide your actions.
Breath. The young woman took a deep breath, centering herself. The villagers formed a wide circle around the square, creating a space that felt sacred and focused. Bang. In the center, a series of targets had been arranged. Each target represented a different lesson: courage, responsibility, fairness, and honor. Some were close and easy to hit, while others were far away or partially hidden, requiring precise calculation and focus. She knew that the man was not merely testing her aim, he was testing her understanding of the deeper meaning behind each shot. She picked up her first arrow, feeling the familiar curve of the wood and the smooth string beneath her fingers. She drew the bow slowly, focusing on the target that represented courage. She thought about the challenges she had faced, the fear she had felt when she first raised her arrow, and the courage it had taken to act despite that fear. Then, with careful precision, she released the arrow. It flew straight and true, hitting the center of the target. A quiet murmur of approval passed through the villagers, and she felt a surge of confidence. The next target represented responsibility. This one was more difficult, positioned at an angle that required adjustment and thought. She took a moment to consider her approach, remembering the lessons of patience and understanding. She breathed deeply, steadied her hands, and released the arrow. It struck the target slightly off-center but still successful. She realized that even small mistakes were part of the learning process, and that each shot was an opportunity to grow, not just a measure of perfection. The following targets tested her fairness and honor. Some were placed near obstacles that required her to calculate the trajectory carefully. Others were positioned to test her judgment, forcing her to decide whether to take a risky shot for glory or a safer shot for consistency. She remembered the man's words: true power was not in speed or force, but in understanding and wise action. She chose each shot thoughtfully, balancing risk and reward, and her arrows struck each target with growing precision.
As she continued, the young woman noticed the reactions of the villagers.
Their expressions shifted from curiosity to admiration. They saw not just a skilled archer, but someone who had learned to combine strength with wisdom.
Her movements were calm and deliberate, reflecting her growing confidence and understanding.
She realized that this test was teaching her more than just skill. It was shaping her character, showing her how to lead, act with honor, and uphold the laws that had guided her people for generations. The man who had guided her watched closely, offering quiet encouragement. But times he would gesture subtly, pointing out adjustments she could make or offering a word of advice. His presence was reassuring, a reminder that while this test measured her abilities, it was also a chance for growth. She felt gratitude for his guidance, understanding that he was not simply evaluating her skill, but helping her become the person she was meant to be. The final target was the most difficult. It represented balance, the harmony of strength, wisdom, courage, and restraint. It was placed at a distance that challenged her aim, partially hidden behind a tree trunk that required careful calculation. The villagers held their breath, sensing the importance of this shot. The young woman approached the target with a steady heart and focused mind. Best. She recalled all the lessons she had learned: patience, control, understanding, and respect. She drew the bow slowly, aligning her thoughts with her actions. Brace. Then, with a smooth release, she let the arrow fly. It struck the target perfectly. A collective gasp of admiration went through the villagers, followed by soft applause. The young woman felt a wave of satisfaction and relief. She had not only demonstrated her skill, but she had shown her understanding, patience, and honor. The man nodded approvingly, a quiet smile on his face. The elders spoke in low tones, acknowledging her success and the growth she had shown over the past days. She felt a deep sense of pride, not in her skill alone, but in the character she had developed. After the test, the young woman walked through the village square, receiving nods and quiet congratulations from the villagers. She realized that she had earned not just respect, but trust. They saw in her someone who could balance strength with wisdom, courage with restraint, and ambition with honor. Her journey had transformed her from a young woman acting on anger to someone capable of understanding and applying the laws that governed their people. That evening, the man who had caught her arrow spoke with her privately. "You have done well," he said. "This test was more than skill. It was about showing that you understand what it means to act with honor and responsibility. You have shown courage, patience, and wisdom. You have begun to walk the path that our ancestors intended for those who are strong, but also wise." Bass.
The young woman listened, feeling a deep sense of respect and gratitude. "I understand now," she said quietly.
Breaths. Strength is important, but it is nothing without understanding. Courage is nothing without restraint. And power is nothing without wisdom. Begged.
Exactly. Remember these lessons and you will be able to face any challenge with honor and integrity.
Our people have survived for generations because we act not just with strength, but with wisdom. You are now part of that tradition, and you carry it forward. Over the following days, the young woman continued to practice, but her focus had changed. She was no longer simply aiming for precision or speed. She was practicing with intention, reflecting on each shot and what it represented. She began teaching younger villagers, sharing not just her skill with the bow, but the lessons of patience, wisdom, and understanding. Her experience became a source of inspiration, showing others that true strength came from balancing action with thought and courage with restraint. The village also began to see her as a leader. Her ability to combine skill with wisdom made her a role model, someone who could help resolve disputes and guide others in making fair decisions. Her presence brought a sense of calm and confidence to the community. They knew that she could act decisively when needed, but also with fairness and honor. Her journey had transformed her, and through her, the village had grown stronger as well. One afternoon, the young woman was called to mediate a minor dispute between two families over a small piece of land. The conflict could have escalated, but she approached it with the lessons she had learned. She listened carefully to both sides, asked thoughtful questions, and reminded everyone of the principles of courage, respect, and fairness. Her calm and wise approach diffused the tension, and the families reached an agreement without anger or resentment. The villagers watched in admiration, realizing that she had truly understood the deeper meaning of the law. As the sun set on the village, the young woman reflected on her journey. She had come seeking to prove her strength, but she had discovered something far more valuable: the power of wisdom, patience, and honor. She had learned that true courage was not in acting first, but in understanding the consequences of one's actions. She had learned that skill alone could not earn respect, but that character, integrity, and understanding could. The man who had caught her arrow spoke one last time that day. You have grown much in a short time. Remember that the journey does not end here. There will always be challenges, but you now have the knowledge and understanding to face them. Act with honor, and you will continue to make your people proud. The young woman nodded, feeling a deep sense of purpose. She knew that she had been given a gift, and it was now her responsibility to carry it forward. She felt ready for whatever challenges lay ahead, confident in her ability to act with skill, wisdom, and courage. Her journey was far from over, but she had taken a significant step forward, becoming not just a skilled archer but a wise and respected member of her community. And so, Part 3 ended with her triumph, not just in hitting the targets, but in proving her understanding and growth. She had faced a challenge that tested her mind, her heart, and her skill, and she had emerged stronger, wiser, and more prepared for the responsibilities that lay ahead. The village celebrated her success quietly, knowing that this young woman would one day guide them with the same balance of courage and wisdom that had defined their people for generations. The village woke to a quiet morning, but the calm was misleading. A dispute had arisen between two families over water rights to a small creek that ran along the edge of the village. Both families relied on the water for their crops and livestock, and tensions had been building for days. Small arguments had already turned into shouting matches, and now there was a real risk that the disagreement could spiral into something more serious. Villagers gathered cautiously, aware that today the young woman who had proven her skill and wisdom might be needed more than ever. The young woman, now recognized for her courage, patience, and understanding, stepped into the square. Her bow hung at her side, not as a weapon today, but as a reminder of the lessons she had learned. Patience and character, and she had emerged stronger. The villagers looked to her, hoping that she could guide this conflict toward peace. The elders watched silently, their expressions thoughtful, as if they already knew that she was ready to apply the wisdom she had gained. She approached the families calmly, her eyes meeting the anxious and angry faces of the men and women involved. "We are all part of this community," she said gently, her voice carrying clearly across the square. "We share the same land, the same water, and the same traditions. I am here to help, not to take sides. Let us speak and listen carefully, and find a solution together." Yes. The two heads of the families exchanged glances, still tense but slightly softened by her calm presence. She could see that both sides had valid concerns. Each family had worked hard to maintain their land and their resources, and both felt a sense of injustice. She knew that a solution would require more than words. It would require wisdom, fairness, and respect for the laws that guided their people. She began by listening to each side carefully. She let them speak without interruption, nodding and acknowledging their concerns. As she listened, she reminded herself of the lessons she had learned about patience, understanding, and balance. The goal was not to dominate the conversation, but to guide it toward understanding and compromise. She spoke softly but firmly, asking questions that encouraged reflection. "What do you both need most?" she asked.
How can we share what is important to both families? Slowly, the anger began to dissipate. Both sides realized that the young woman was not judging them or taking sides, but was helping them see the bigger picture.
She reminded them of the traditions that had guided the Apache people for generations, principles of respect, fairness, and cooperation. She explained that disputes were not meant to divide, but to teach, and that the solution must strengthen the community rather than create more conflict. The young woman suggested a plan. The water could be shared according to the needs of each family, with certain times and sections of the creek allocated fairly. Both families would have access for their crops and animals, and a system of communication would ensure that misunderstandings would not escalate in the future. She emphasized that this solution was not just about water, but about trust, respect, and cooperation. The elders nodded in approval. The man who had caught her arrow was nearby, observing quietly. He had guided her through lessons of skill, patience, and wisdom, and now he watched as she applied those lessons in a real-life situation. The villagers, too, began to see that the young woman was not only skilled but wise, capable of guiding them through conflict with calm and fairness. Her actions reflected everything they had been taught: courage, restraint, and understanding. After the families agreed to the plan, she spoke again, addressing everyone present. "This is how we honor the law and our traditions," she said. "But we do not act out of anger or pride. We act with courage, understanding, and respect. Today we have found a solution together, and the community is stronger for it." Her words were simple but powerful, and they resonated with everyone in the village. The mood of the village shifted. Where there had been tension and fear, there was now relief and admiration. Villagers whispered among themselves, recognizing the young woman's growth and the strength of her character. She had faced tests of skill, wisdom, and courage, and she had proven herself not just to herself, but to the entire community. She had shown that true strength comes from understanding, patience, and fairness. Later that afternoon, she walked through the village, greeted warmly by neighbors who had once been unsure of her abilities. Children followed her, eager to hear the lessons she had learned. She shared her experiences, teaching them that courage was not just about action, but about understanding the consequences of one's actions. She reminded them that strength without wisdom could harm, and that patience, fairness, and respect were as important as skill. As she spoke, the man who had caught her arrow approached quietly. "You have done well," he said. "Today you applied everything you have learned. You have guided the community, resolved conflict, and honored our traditions. You have grown into someone who understands not just the law but the meaning behind it." The young woman felt a deep sense of gratitude. "I could not have done it without your guidance," she said, "and without the lessons I learned from the elders and the community." I understand now that true strength is more than skill. It is wisdom, courage, and respect for others. He nodded. "Exactly. You have learned well, and now it is your responsibility to carry these lessons forward. Others will look to you, and you will guide them with the knowledge and wisdom you have gained." That evening, the village gathered around the fire. The young woman sat with her family and the elders, reflecting on all that had happened. The dispute over the water was resolved. Tensions were eased, and the community had witnessed the power of understanding, courage, and fairness in action. She realized that the journey she had begun months ago with a single arrow had led to something much greater. It had taught her the meaning of law, the value of wisdom, and the importance of acting with honor. The elders spoke softly, praising her growth and the way she had applied the lessons of the past days. They reminded the villagers that the strength of their community came not from force alone, but from the ability to act wisely, to listen, and to respect the traditions that had guided their people for generations. The young woman listened, humbled and proud, understanding that she had become part of something larger than herself. Over the next few weeks, her reputation continued to grow. She was called upon to mediate small disputes, offer guidance, and demonstrate leadership in the community. Each time she acted, she applied the lessons of patience, courage, and wisdom. Villagers began to trust her not only for her skill with the bow, but for her judgment and fairness. She had become a symbol of balance, the living example of how strength and wisdom could work together to guide a community. One day, she sat by the creek, watching the water flow peacefully. The same creek that had caused tension and fear was now a symbol of cooperation and harmony. She thought about the arrow she had released months ago in anger, and the man who had caught it mid-air. She understood now that his actions had not only prevented harm, but had set her on a path of growth and understanding. That single moment had changed everything, teaching her lessons that would guide her for the rest of her life. The man approached and stood quietly beside her. "You have learned more than I could have taught in 100 lessons," he said. "You have applied wisdom, courage, and understanding. The village is stronger because of you, and you have honored the law in every way."
She smiled, feeling a deep sense of peace.
"I understand now," she said. "True strength is more than what we can do with our hands. It is what we do with our hearts and minds. It is how we act with wisdom, courage, and fairness. Today, I see that clearly, and I am grateful for every lesson." The sun set over the village, casting long shadows and painting the sky with shades of pink and orange. The young woman stood, looking over the community she had helped guide. She felt a deep sense of pride and purpose. She had faced challenges, learned lessons, and grown in ways she had never imagined. She had applied the law, honored her people, and proven that true strength comes from courage, wisdom, and respect. That night, as the village settled into quiet, she reflected on her journey. She had started with a single arrow, fired in anger and frustration, but it had led her to understanding, growth, and respect. She had learned the meaning of Apache law, the value of patience and courage, and the power of acting wisely. She had become a leader, a guide, and a symbol of what it meant to balance strength with understanding. And so, the story of the young woman who had learned from an arrow caught midair reached its conclusion. She had transformed not only herself, but the community around her. She had shown that courage without wisdom is incomplete, and strength without respect is hollow. Through her actions, she had honored the traditions of her people and ensured that their lessons would continue to guide future generations. The village slept peacefully that night, the creek flowing gently, the stars shining brightly above. The young woman rested with a calm heart, knowing that she had grown into someone who could face any challenge with courage, wisdom, and fairness. The arrow that had once flown through the air in anger had changed everything, guiding her to a life of understanding, honor, and true strength.